Hello and welcome to How To Automotive. Today we're working on a BMW X5 with the F15 chassis, N55 motor. We're going to be replacing the valve cover gaskets. I'm Brian Essex from How To Automotive. I'm going to walk you step by step through that process. So here are the parts and seals that you're going to need to do this job. I will link them down in the description of the video. That way if you need to pick any of these up, you can find those there. We're going to get started by removing the top engine cover. It's just held on with rubber grommets. You just lift up in the corners of it and pull it up like this and set it aside. We're going to get started by removing the air inlet tube here. We're going to do that by loosening the clamps at the top and at the bottom. We're going to remove a fastener right here on the back here. We're going to pop it off the air box right here. We're going to follow it down and we're going to remove the vacuum line here. And we're going to get that out of the way. And then this PCV pipe here we're going to remove. So we're going to loosen up the clamps here at the top and the bottom. Once we get those loosened, then we're going to remove a 10mm bolt that's right above the corrugated PCV hose here. We're going to go ahead and remove this fastener. So we're going to remove this PCV tube here. It's held on with 4 little plastic tabs. You can use pick tools, screwdrivers to pick it off, and they tend to be extremely brittle. So I'm adding a link for a brand new one in the description of the video. That way, if you do break it, you can just go ahead and replace it. If you find it's really hard and really brittle, sometimes it's just faster and easier to break it off and replace the valve. Also at the bottom of this valve will be a little electrical connector you're going to unplug. Once you get this unplugged or pushed back a little bit, then there's going to be a vacuum hose here. You're just going to squeeze the tabs on it and then pull up and pull it off. Now we're going to just pull it out of our way. You're going to unhook it right here in front of the air box and kind of just tuck it off out of your way. Now it's time to work the air snorkel off. So we're going to pull it off the air box on the top and the bottom here. It takes a little finesse, a little bit of wiggle and a little bit of pry and maneuver, just to get it to come off. And just take your time, make sure nothing's attached to it. And the little rubber grommets on the front here can fall off, so you want to watch for all that stuff here. And then go ahead and take it off and set it aside. So right in the center of the valve cover is a cam sensor. We're going to grab this connector, wiggle a little bit, and pull it off, and then set this aside. Now we can work on getting the hard plastic vacuum line here loose. There's some tabs on the side. You'll squeeze and pull it off. I was unable to squeeze the tabs with just my fingers, so I used a pair of pliers to squeeze it and then pull it off like this. Now you can just tuck this out of the way. I'm going to work on getting the airbox assembly removed. I'm using a T25 Torx bit to remove this fasteners that go around the perimeter of the airbox here. I'm not going to remove the whole airbox, just the top lid and the air filter, and get these out of our way. So once you go ahead and take these off, just set that aside. So just under the package tray here, we're going to work on getting this wiring harness free. It's also attached to the lower supports of the package tray. So we're going to work on getting these fasteners free and so we can get slack in the wiring harness. So we're going to remove those couple fasteners on the left and the right side, holding the wiring harness down to the top of the cover. You're going to need a Torx socket to remove those fasteners. I believe they were either a T27 or a T30. When I was first tackling this job, I thought there'd be enough room to get the valve cover out with the package tray in, but later on I decided to take it out. It would be much easier, and I'll show you all those steps too. So right here I'm working on the wiring harness on the top of the valve cover here. It would be easier to get to this with the package tray off, but it's not that big of a deal if you choose to do it the same way I'm doing here. There's a couple fasteners that hold the bracket that hold the wiring harness to the top of the cover. One of the Torx screws was underneath the AC lines here, so I had to use a Torx bit and a little low-profile ratchet here to get to that fastener and get that off. Now that I have slack in the wiring harness, I can lift it up just enough to get this foam pad that's on top of the valve cover here off, this insulation here. Just want to take your time with this right here. It tears pretty easily, so you just work in small little increments, lift up the wiring harness and work your way around it and pull it out. Underneath that foam pad is going to be some wiring for the oxygen sensors here. I'm going to go ahead and unplug that. So I'm going to pull it out of its little brackets here, unplug these, and flip the wiring harness over to the passenger or driver's side. Also, the connectors are really similar, so I made a paint mark on each one of the connectors for one of the connectors here, just so I have references when I go back together which way they go. Squeeze the tabs on the sides of it, and then pull them apart. On this bundle of wires here, there was 3 connectors that we unplugged. So we're going to unplug all 3 of these connectors, and then you can flip the wiring harness over to the driver's side of the vehicle and out of our way. Now I have a clear view of the top of the valve cover here, and I can see there's a lot of dirt and debris on it. So I'm going to use some compressed air and blow off as much of this dirt and debris. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses so it doesn't blow into your face and eyes. And that way, when you take it apart, all that debris doesn't fall into the motor. Next, I'm going to work on getting the metal fuel lines off. I used a 14mm wrench here to crack these free. So I just cracked them free here just slightly so it slightly bleeds off the fuel pressure that's on here. Once you get them all cracked free, all the fuel pressure is bled out of it. There's not a whole lot of pressure on it. Then you can just go over it and remove all of them by hand. Use a little spin off with your fingers. So these metal pipes are held together with a little clamp in the center of it. So you're going to spin all the fasteners loose until you can take them off. You want to keep them all together like this and try to keep them on a bench, like exact order how they go. That way there's no problems trying to put them back together later, trying to figure out which one went to what. Just lay them out so they go right back together. Another good idea is when we're working with lots of parts like this, is to keep track of everything. Is I like to take photographs of it. That way when I go back together, I can use it as references. So now that I got the last fuel lines off, I lay them out on my bench in order so I know exactly how they go back together. Next, we're going to remove all 6 of the ignition coils. To do that, we're going to flip the little lever upwards, pull the electrical connector off, and with a flat blade screwdriver, fit it underneath the coil and pry upwards. There's no bolts holding them down. They're just press fit. So you flip the switch up, pull the connector off, and then you put your screwdriver underneath, and then you can pry up on it. And just like the fuel lines that we took off and laid out in order on the bench, I like to do the same thing with the ignition coils. So when I pop these out, I'll lay them all out on my bench in order. Now that the coil's out, I'm going to remove this little metal bracket right here that held the oxygen sensor wiring down. So we're going to go ahead and remove the screw for that and set this aside. And I did that to gain access to the very last coil in the back. As you can see here, I laid all my coils and fuel lines all in the order they go, so when I go back together, it's much easier to keep track of all this stuff. Now we need to unplug all our fuel injectors, and the way you're going to do that is you're going to need a pick tool like this, and at the very front of the injector is a little tab. So you're going to put the pick tool in there and flare the tab just slightly. You don't want to break the tab off, and then you're going to pull the connector off. Now I've found that if you try to pull from the wires, you can damage the injector wires and pull them out of the pins. So what I like to use is a pair of pliers that are designed to remove those plastic clips and pins. The way that it's designed, it pinches right on there without pinching the wires, and you can pull it off. It's real easy. So you're just going to go down the line and unplug all 6 of the injectors. Once you get all 6 of the injectors unplugged, the next step is going to be to remove the 3 ground wires that are held on with 8mm bolts. So there's one here at the front, one in the middle, and one at the very back of the valve cover here. We need to undo those bolts and take these wires off. The stud that the ground wires are mounted to are fragile, so I recommend doing this by hand. I wouldn't recommend power tools. You could break the little stud off. At the front of the wire loom, there's a little plastic tab. You're going to flare that, and that's going to pop the wire loom free from its catch. Now you can take the whole wire loom assembly like this and pull it out and flip it over towards the driver's side of the vehicle and out of our way. Attached to the side of the valve cover are 2 vacuum hoses going into the valve cover itself. I use a pair of needle-nose pliers to just rotate those side to side like this and then pull those vacuum hoses off and just let them hang in towards the exhaust. Now we're ready to unbolt the valve cover itself. So you're going to start here at one corner and work your way down the top side here, removing all the fasteners. These bolts don't come out of them. They'll stay in there. And so you'll work your way around the perimeter of the cover. Then you'll go down the center here and then go back down the center back like this. These fasteners are E10 female Torx bolts, so you're going to need E-Torque sockets to remove this. And I just used the ratchet right here. I'm using my Milwaukee Tools cordless ratchet here. I will link up all the tools that I'm using in this video in the description, so I'm just going to start here in the corner and just work my way down the cover. You may notice that I did not take the package tray off. You can do this job without taking that off, but later on I decided to take it off because I determined that I can get the valve cover out of the vehicle, but it would be hard to get it back in without knocking the gasket off. So I'll walk you through the process of removing the package tray. You only have to remove part of it. You don't have to remove the whole thing, and I'll walk you through that step. When it comes to working on it in the very back, you may have to switch up your extensions to shorter or longer ones, depending on what you're working on back there to get to those. Now, the reason why I didn't take that package tray also is because I'm a flat rate mechanic, and sometimes you try to do things to make more time or make it faster. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And for those of you that don't know what flat rate is, it's basically instead of getting paid by the hour, I get paid by the job. And if the book says it takes 5 hours to do this job and I do it in 3, I can still get paid for 5 hours. So you try to figure out ways to make it more efficient by not taking things apart and working around it. You could also buy special tools and equipment to make the jobs more efficient. So it's definitely a tricky pay scale. A lot of times you lose. So if it says 5 hours, it might take you 7 hours. You only get paid for 5. So it works both ways. So once you get the fasteners all undone, you're going to use a little flat blade screwdriver right here in the corner of the cover and just pop it up. You don't want to force anything. You just want to put light pressure and try to lift the cover up. If it feels like it's not coming up, it's probably because you left the fastener still tightened, and go back over it, make sure. As you'll see here, I got the cover free and I'm pulling the cover off, and I got it out without taking that package tray off, but you'll see I struggle with it a little bit. It wasn't the easiest thing to take it out. Even with the package tray out, you still have to worry about the wires and snagging and stuff. And that was my main thing right here. So you don't want to force anything. You just want to work slowly and just take your time, and it will come out. So the gaskets get hard and brittle. And as you can see, when I pulled it out, the gasket was broken and stuck to the block and halfway on the valve cover here. So you got to be careful for that. The pieces of it can fall into the motor, so you want to look for that. So now that we got it off, we're going to clean the mating surface. We're going to make sure you wipe away from the inside of the motor. So you want to wipe it outwards, drying off any oil, dirt, and debris from around the center and the perimeter of the cylinder head here. Once you got the cylinder head cleaned up, we're going to clean up the gasket material on the valve cover itself, clean this up. You're also going to inspect the valve cover to make sure it's not warped. These do warp occasionally and you have to replace them. So go ahead and clean this up now. Now, to make it easier to go back in before we put it back together, I'm decided to take this package tray off, so I'm going to show you how to do that. So if you notice these 13mm plastic nuts here on the package tray, you want to turn those a quarter turn counterclockwise, and it releases a little catch underneath it. There's also going to be a push pin right here that we're going to remove, and then right over here is a torque screw we're going to remove. So once you get the fastener removed and the clip removed, you can grab this rubber weather stripping here and just lift it up and slide it off and just set it aside for now. Then with a flat blade screwdriver, I put it underneath the panel here and lifted it up and popped it off. Now I'm going to set this aside now. So now we're going to flip over to the opposite side of the vehicle and do the exact same thing. We're going to take out the screw right here in the front. We're going to unscrew the 3 little set screws, or the plastic little nuts here, the 13mm that you turn a quarter turn. And we're going to lift this plastic panel off. So we're going to take this and set this aside. So this panel right underneath the wiper arm here in the middle comes off. There's a couple more screws we're going to take out right here. There's going to be 2 of these, so you'll take those out right here. And once you get these 2 removed, then you can just grab this little center piece here and pull and lift out and set aside. Now back on the passenger side, we're going to take out the cabin air filter here, or the pollen filter. You're going to turn the little plastic knobs you'll see in here counterclockwise a quarter turn. Now you can lift this pollen or cabin air filter out. So you just lift it up and then pull it out of the vehicle like this. The filters are on the inside of the cover right here. So there's 2 of them here. So if they're dirty, go ahead and change those out as well. Now we're going to work on getting this plastic piece out here. There's going to be a couple screws. Actually, there's 3 in total. They're just on the inside of the lip here. So the 2 over here on the top and then 1 right here in the corner. So once you get the 3 fasteners removed, then you can just go ahead and grab this plastic molding right here that we're unbolting and just lift it off. Just grab it and lift it off. Now we're going to work on getting the strut brace removed. We're going to need either a E12 or E14 torque socket, the female torque socket, and remove the 2 fasteners at the ends. Now, like I said, you could work around this and not do this, but this makes it so much easier and safer to put the valve cover back on. If you try to put it on with this package tray on there, you risk of it pushing the gasket off when you put it back in. So on the top of the center of the valve cover is a little seal that goes around the cam sensor. You're going to remove the two fasteners, which is an E6 torque socket that you're going to need to get that off. So we got the valve cover all cleaned up and ready to go. We'll install that seal later for the cam sensor. Now I'm going to test fit the gaskets here. Some of these gaskets fit nice and snug, and you don't have to worry about them falling out. And some of them are looser depending on the brand you buy. So when you turn them upside down, they may fall out. So what you do is test fit it. So I'll install the gasket onto the valve cover itself, and then what I like to do is kind of just feel with my fingers or turn the valve cover upside down and kind of shake it and see if it's a loose fitting gasket. And if it is a loose fitting gasket, it may require gluing. So I test fitted my gasket here, and it's falling out pretty easily, and it's a high risk for it to fall out as you're trying to install it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little 3M weather adhesive in here and glue this gasket into the valve cover. So like I said, this is 3M Super Weather Adhesive. It's the black colored one. You're going to put a thin layer right in the channel here. You don't need to put a whole lot, just a thin little layer, and it won't affect the gasket as far as how it seals. You just put a thin layer in the channel here, and then you reinstall the gasket on there and press it in. You also want to make sure that this channel is oil-free and dry. Once you get the glue in there and then to get the gasket pressed in there, you want to give it a little bit of time to dry, and then here only takes a couple minutes for it to get sticky and hold the gasket in place. So I glue it in, and I just make sure it's good and pressed in there all the way around the whole cover. Now we're ready to reinstall the valve cover. So what we're going to do is carefully lift all the wiring that's going across here out of our way. If you have a helper to have you help you hold the stuff out of your way while you position the valve cover in there, that would be a great opportunity. I didn't have that. I wasn't lucky enough, so I just worked myself really slow and just kept an eye on everything, make sure none of the gaskets falling off here or anything, and just took my time and worked it inside there. Now that I got the valve cover to drop down in place, this next step is the most critical step, which is to double check and make sure that the gasket did not fall off or that anything is pinched underneath the gasket, such as a wire or anything like that. So you want to look around the perimeter of the whole thing and even lift it back up a little bit, even if you put your fingers under there if you have to feel, and make sure. I like to use a mirror to do this with a flashlight, so I'll look around the edge all the way around, especially back here in the back perimeter. That's where you're most likely going to have a problem, is right back here. If the gasket falls off, it usually what it does is it rolls inside, so you want to make sure and just double check. So in my case, the gasket did fall off in the very back there, so I decided to take the valve cover back off, refix the gasket, and then reinstall it back in the vehicle, and then double check it again a second time. Trust me, it's much better to find out that you have a problem now versus when you bolt it all back up and you're about to start it up and you got a massive oil leak because the gasket fell off. So do your due diligence, double check, triple check, and you're going to be just fine. So now we're ready to tighten the bolts down, but we're going to do this in a very specific order. So there's a very specific pattern they want you to do to spread the load out evenly so the gasket will seal and the valve cover itself won't warp. So I printed out the diagram on how it's going to go. I recommend you pause the video and study that or copy it and make your own copy when you go to tighten these down. So I'm going to use a cordless ratchet in the exact pattern that I showed you before and run these bolts down. And the reason I'm using the ratchet is just to speed things up. I'm not tightening these bolts at all with this ratchet, so I'm just running them down until they just barely touch. So now with a torque wrench, we're going to set it up to 8.5 Newton meters or 6 1/4 pounds, and we're going to follow the diagram here. It's going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, and just follow the pattern of it, and we're going to torque all the bolts down in the exact pattern that I showed you before. And now we're working on putting everything back together. So I'm going to just start with the wires here on the left side of the valve cover that clip to the side of it with the little metal clips. Let's just clip those back in. Also the one vacuum hose. The other one we'll plug in a minute. Now we can go ahead and install our football-shaped seal that goes around the cam sensor here. Go ahead and just slip that on, and you can go ahead and start the two bolts and tighten those down. Just run them down so they're snug and about a quarter turn more. So now I'm working on the wiring harness for the coils and injectors here. So I'm going ahead and flip that back into place and clip it back onto the side of the valve cover here and just press it in until it clips in. So what I'm doing right here is I'm putting the little ground wires onto the little studs with the 8mm bolts. So I'm going to go ahead and start those. So there's 3 of them, one in the very back, one in the middle right here. Put the ground wire on, start the bolt, and then do the one in the front, and then we'll go back over it and we'll tighten them up. So after starting all 3 of the nuts on the studs for the ground straps here, now we're going to tighten them up. I'm just using a 1/4-inch ratchet and I'm running them until they're snug and maybe a 1/4 turn more. You don't want to put too much pressure on these. They will snap off the little stud. So they just need to be snug. Now that that's done, we can go ahead and plug in all 6 of the injectors here. So the little white wires, you want to make sure they push in and fully seat into the injector. If you leave any gap, and it will have a misfire or a bad connection, so make sure they fully seat in there. And we're going to do all 6 of those. And the way the wiring harness is all laid out, it's impossible to mix them up. All the wires are just right in front of each one of the injectors, so just plug them in. Now we can go ahead and install all 6 of the ignition coils. So you're going to push them down the tubes, and then we're going to plug them in. And this key when you plug them in is to really push the connector in as far as you can, and then close the latch, and then push the coil down and make sure it fully seats into the little pocket there. So we're going to do all 6 of them. So I just start in the back and just work my way forward. And the key thing is to make sure that injector is fully plugged in. I've had them where they like a little gap and they'll create misfires. So you want to make sure they're plugged in all the way. Now that all the coils are plugged in, we can take this little bracket here that held the oxygen sensor wire looms down. We can go ahead and bolt that back up. Now we can take our little wire loom here and flip it across and plug in the oxygen sensor and the vacuum switch on the side here. Go ahead and plug all those 3 connectors in. So on one of the oxygen sensors, we marked it so we don't get them mixed up, because the wire looms look very similar and it's possible to plug them in the wrong one. So go ahead and line those up, plug those in, and then once we get the 2 oxygen sensors plugged in here, then we can go ahead and clip it into that metal bracket that we just installed there. So they just clip in. And then there's a vacuum switch down below on the side of the valve cover. You want to lay the wires on the little channels that go across the valve cover, so you'll see them. You want the wires to lay nice and flat and not sticking up. Now we can reinstall the fuel lines that we took off, and we had them laid out in order. So I picked the ones in the very back, and I'm going to start with the back ones and go ahead and start these. Lay them into position and start both of the fasteners on the left and on the right side of the fuel injectors. And as you can see, I had to pop the oxygen sensor wires back out of their little loom holders. The wires are a little bit in the way of starting the bolts on the fuel injectors. Now that I got them all started, I went ahead and tightened them up with an open-end 14mm wrench. So I just ran them until they were snug, and then finished tightening them up with the open end of the wrench here, just about a 1/4 turn or more. You'll feel them snug down on there. So I like to start in the furthest one back and then slowly work my way forward. So I got all the ones in the back here all tight and secure. After that, I'll grab the next set of fuel lines, and I'll just keep running in order and run down the line, and then go ahead and install all these fuel lines and tighten them all up until from number 6 all the way down to number 1. Now that you have all the fuel lines secure and tightened, you can take the wire loom here for the cam sensor and plug that in. Now we can take the foam pad that was in the very back of the valve cover here and reposition that. So go ahead and put that back into position and make sure it's secure and snug. Now that the foam pad is back in place, we can take this plastic little tray here that held the battery cables and wire loom here and put that back into position. So you put it over the top of the foam here, and you can even clip the cables and wires back into it. And then there's 2 screws on the left and 2 screws on the right that we're going to start and run those down and tighten them up. We're also going to clip the plastic cover that went over the top here back into position, so it just snaps into place once you get everything lined up. So on the inlet pipe here is this PCV hose here. We're going to go ahead and remove that. If you broke it like I did, I broke the tab, so I'm going to replace it. So I'm going to take that off. Now that that's off, I'm going to take the whole pipe and go ahead and bolt that into position. So I'll put it down into position and start it on the lower inlet down here. Also at the top here, we can find the wiring harness for the mass airflow sensor and go ahead and plug that in at the top right here. Also, this plastic vent line here, we can flip that back into position and go ahead and plug that back in and remount it into its catch right here in the front of the airbox. Now the inlet tube is not bolted down, it's just stabbed onto the inlet portion down below. So now we can put the PCV hose here in, go ahead and put that into the tube, and we can start the two bolts down there, and then we'll clip it onto the valve cover here where it clips in. You can also plug in the little electric connector on the PCV hose here. So once you get everything mounted, you can go ahead and put the screws in and run those down until they're snug. Now that you got the PCV tube resecured, you can go ahead and put the little 10mm bolt that held the tube to the valve cover here, the main mounting point. Go ahead and start that and run that in and snug it up. So on the tube here, there's two little rubber grommets that plug in right here that usually fall out. So go ahead and plug those back in if you took those off. So we're ready to put the air filter in. My air box was full of sand and debris, so I just took a little compressed air and blew it out. Then I went ahead and installed the air filter back into the air box here. After cleaning out the air box and installing the air filter, then we'll go ahead and take the top lid here, stab it onto the pipe right here, fit it on the air box, and start all the screws and tighten those down, and then tighten up all the hose clamps. Now we're at a spot where we can start the engine and double check that there's no oil leaks, fuel leaks, anything like that, misfires, anything that we need to adjust before we put the package tray and the final top engine covers back on. So after running the vehicle for a couple minutes, double checking that there's no oil leaks or fuel leaks and everything's running smooth, now we can take the strut bracing here and go ahead and reinstall that. Then you can run the fasteners down and snug those up. Now you can take the center piece of the cowling here and go ahead and reinstall that. Now we can install this plastic piece here that went on top of the strut bracing here. So just line it up into position and go ahead and start the bolts and then run those in and the clips. Once you get that plastic piece lined up, go ahead and start all the bolts and run these fasteners in and snug them up. Now you can take the cabin air filter box here and go ahead and put that back into position and then snap it in. Once you get the cabin filter into position, you can go ahead and turn these little catches here clockwise 90 degrees and that'll lock it down into place. Now we can work on getting the two corner pieces back installed, the little plastic covers that covered up the strut towers and brake master cylinder here. Go ahead and line that, stuff it in there like this, line it up. I did the driver's side first. Then I switched over to the passenger side here and laid this plastic panel into place. And once you get it all into place, then you're going to take the little plastic catches where they're little nuts and turn those clockwise 1/4 degrees. And that'll lock everything down. So you're going to do that for the left and the right side. After you get those two panels secured, now we're going to take the rubber grommet that went across, or the rubber molding that went across the whole thing, and put that back on. So you just line it up with the lip here and press it into position. Now that we got the rubber molding resecured, now we're going to work on getting the top engine cover here. So we're just going to line up the little ports here in the back. And once you get those lined up, then you just push the engine cover straight down and it'll lock on some rubber grommets that are underneath here. So I will link up all the parts and tools that I use in this video in the description. That way, if you need to pick any of those up, you can find those there. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.